Welcome to Civics in a Year, the podcast that makes civic literacy fast, accessible, and surprisingly engaging. In just 10 minutes an episode, we'll tackle one of 250 essential questions about American democracy, how it works, why it matters, and what it means for you. Whether you're a student, a teacher, or just someone who wants to better understand your country and your rights, you're in the right place. Civics in a Year is powered by the Civic Literacy Curriculum from the Center for American Civics and is produced in partnership with the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. Welcome back to Civics in a Year. Dr. Beienberg is back with us. Today we're talking about World War II hero and president Dwight D. Eisenhower and his farewell address that he gave in 1961. So, Dr. Beienberg, why is the farewell address from President Eisenhower so important?
Well, I'll just say, for one thing, this is another one of my very, very favorite texts in American politics in terms of being, it is so rich. It is not just a platitudinous, thanks for letting me serve, peace out. It's very, very rich. I mean, Eisenhower, we could do, podcasts. There are probably whole podcast series just on him operating World War II. But obviously, right, Eisenhower, as you said, is a war hero. After that, you may not remember, he becomes president of Columbia University for a few years. So he actually dips his toe in academia, which is a theme that is in the farewell address. So obviously, he's concluding his presidency. He gets to his presidency. It's probably worth stating a second on that. He's nominated. Obviously, everybody wants him, the Democrats and Republicans, when he's your great war hero.
Yes.
He ends up on the Republican side, and he defeats Robert Taft, who is the son of William Howard Taft. Robert Taft is the leader of sort of the conservative wing of the Republican Party, and he is also the leader of its his more skeptical of intervention wing. And I'll come back to why I'm caveating that so much in a second. Mm-hmm. Eisenhower's domestic policy, we have really fun letters between him and he has two brothers. He have more than that, but I know the letters to two of them. One of his brothers is an extremely progressive, like FDR New Dealer fanatic. And the other one is basically somebody who thinks that FDR destroyed the Constitution by expanding federal power. And so he has these funny letters to and from these two brothers. And he sort of has the impish take of, well, if they're both mad at me, I'm probably sort of in the middle in an okay place. So privately, Eisenhower agrees with his more conservative brother. He thinks that the expansion of federal power was heinous. He loves federalism and states' rights. He doesn't like FDR. But he says politically, like attacking the New Deal would be utterly political madness because it's become popular. So he takes the attitude of sort of, not expanding it, but not chopping it back either. But mostly his focus really is on foreign policy because this is during the Cold War. So he becomes the Republican nominee for president, defeating Taft. Taft had been the one who's more skeptical of U.S. intervention, but Taft is easy to caricature. History books, especially for like middle schools or high schools or whatever, tends to want to make these really simple binaries. Eisenhower is for intervention. Taft is the isolationist. And if you read Taft's book from 51, which is sort of his campaign platform, he is very explicit and he says, look, we shouldn't be involved in most foreign policy issues. It's not our problem if there are wars in the world. It's not our problem if there are injustices in the world. He says, the fundamental goal of American foreign policy is liberty for Americans. The next goal, he says, is the avoidance of war. So he says, we are willing to undertake war if necessary to preserve the liberty of Americans, but we're not doing kind of the Woodrow Wilson idea of us as remaking the world. So that sounds like the sort of caricature of Taft as like he just doesn't care about the world. But then he goes on to say, the unique threat of communism is so dangerous that I will relax some of these positions temporarily in order to defeat worldwide communism. And so he says, I'm against NATO because I think that the UN is actually what we want to have to resist Russian intervention. Russia has obviously a seat on the Security Council, but basically the idea that they'll push back. But he says, I'm against foreign aid in general. I'm absolutely for the Marshall Plan. So, sorry. Yeah, he goes through and he walks through basically lots of places where he thinks that the United States must participate to avoid communism because he thinks it is uniquely dangerous. He says effectively the difference between the Soviet Union and communism and other ideas. He says it's basically the closest to like during the Crusades when he says basically sort of religious demands to take the Holy Land from he's arguing for the Arabs taking that area. But he says it's closer to that. He says it's closer to religious fanaticism than just sort of old school. We want more territory. We want more land. We want more resources. And so Taft, even as an isolationist, broadly says but communism is so uniquely dangerous. And then he goes on to say, but we have to meet, taxes, taxes, government takeover of military industry, et cetera. These are dangerous and they can threaten liberty. And I flag all that because these are themes that Eisenhower picks up in his farewell address. I think that the difference between Taft and Eisenhower in some ways is less pronounced than some folks think. Partly that's because John Foster Dulles is a Taft person that Eisenhower makes as his sort of foreign policy guru. But the farewell address is Eisenhower basically saying, all right, the Cold War is up and running. Communism is uniquely dangerous. As he says, we face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, insidious in method. Unhappily, the danger it poses promises to be of indefinite duration. And so he's explaining why, this is 13 years afterward, but, he's explaining why the United States did not just get to demobilize after World War II, as it had in every other war. I mean, after the Civil War, the army is tiny. It's a few little platoons basically off on dealing with sort of Indian conflicts. But obviously you have the national security state. Truman builds a lot of this up, and Eisenhower is doing that, right? By this point, both the Soviet Union and I think the Chinese by this point have nuclear weapons. If not, they're getting pretty close. I'm trying to remember the exact timeline on that, right? So he recognizes we cannot deal with sort of threats coming, retool up. And so he's explaining why communism requires this massive expansion of particularly military power. Mm-hmm. But most of the address is kind of Taft-like in the sense of he says, there are real costs to liberty that we are paying for this. And we need to be very careful about those and very clear-eyed about the costs and the benefits of that, instead of just simply saying, well, national security, we can do whatever we want. And so, he's talking about the most famous line is the military industrial complex, when he's worried about basically defense contractors saying, you got to buy this cool new thing or the world's going to end, and sort of pressing the federal government to spend money on things that it never needs. Again, all under the proviso of communism is uniquely dangerous. It's not a joke. We need to deal with it. But that can't just be turned into a generic rationalization for everything. The one that I find really striking, and this is why I mentioned the Columbia University thing, he talks a lot about how the Cold War can distort and wreck our education system, particularly higher education, because he says he's worried that the need to have federal research funding, again, go back to the Manhattan Project, whatever, that is going through universities. But he says he fears that will co-opt the spirits of our universities and our colleges to basically be research oriented around rather than sort of education and teaching oriented. And he worries that this will create a scientific technological elite of basically people that think that their educational credentials mean that they sort of feel entitled to lord over the rest of us. So I think I've read at one point that there was the military industrial complex line, that there was debate about whether to include military industrial academic or something like that as a sort of, whether that was in there or not, the paragraphs afterward basically make the same argument to say that, the prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment and the power of money is present and gravely to be regarded. And so then he goes on to say the task of statesmanship is to basically deal with these challenges and these expansions of federal power while trying as best we can to preserve liberty, to preserve the freedom of our institutions. And so again, it's I think really nuanced. It's not just it's not actually that celebratory even. Like, hey, guess what? I have like a 70% approval rating. You all love me. Like, peace out, right? Mic drop, whatever you want to say. Instead, it's actually this like bleak warning of how important the Cold War is because of how dangerous communism is, but also, you risk giving away the things that you're fighting for in the course of fighting for it. So I just and one that I will put my card on the table that I wish had been heeded, as he says, we must avoid the impulse to live for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience the resources of tomorrow. We cannot mortgage the material assets of our grandchildren without asking the loss of their political and spiritual heritage. Democracy that must survive for all generations to become, not the insolvent phantom of tomorrow. So like maybe we shouldn't just raid the treasury to turn up the debt because then they're going to suffer from it. So yeah, I just utterly love this speech. I think it's really, really thoughtful and really an act of statecraft in a way that is not, it's not a partisan tirade. It's not self-congratulatory. It really is a great text of thinking about American political tradition.
It is. I mean, that line that you said, that was going to be one that I talked about because, Eisenhower, I feel like sometimes when we study American history, he is just this like happy little blip, right? Like, oh, he was a World War II hero. And then he brought us into the 50s and everything was great and wonderful. And, he added under God to the pledge.
Yep. Now
during his time.
You heard the atheistic line. That's a theme.
Yes, that's why. Yes.
Yep.
And, in the line that you just said, risking the loss also of their political and spiritual heritage, like he has this very clear, and I think we see this through all presidents, right? The spirituality, this religion, whatever that can look like, but him adding under God to the pledge.
Technically, he asked Congress to do it, but.
Yes, that is.
My separation of powers stickler.
Yes, you are correct. He did make a statement on it. It was a joint resolution amending the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag is Public Law 396 from the 83rd Congress. But he, signed the bill. He was excited about it. But his legacy here, also the fact that he was a member of the Augusta National Golf Club, which famously holds the Masters, and his footprint is all over that golf course. And then Camp David,
yep.
Right? It was named after his grandson, David. So it's interesting. I think just like Calvin Coolidge, of getting to learn more about him. And this speech it is really interesting that he wasn't like you said, 70% approval rating, Eisenhower out. Thanks, everybody. But there are these warnings and this care that is taken to pass this to the next person, to the next generation, whatever that looks like. So and again, I'm reading it as we're going through it, and it's a very classroom friendly speech, I think.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It's a terrific speech. It's terrific, and it's pretty easy to read. And yeah, I think it's top 5, top 10. I really am very keen on that. So I was delighted that when I said let's do Eisenhower farewell, no pushback there.
Nope, no pushback, because this is the only, besides Washington, the only other farewell address that we've done. Right? Again, listeners, we are on this will be episode 207.
Yeah,
so
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think we've done a few of the other inaugurals. I think we've alluded to stuff from the other farewells, but I think that's right. So these are certainly the only 2 that I assign in my classes: Washington farewell and Eisenhower farewell.
Yes. And it will be, I do want to say, we are going to do a D-Day episode, and we will talk about, that famous speech that Eisenhower gave on D-Day. He just, it's a great I think just a great speech in general. So before we get off on another tangent, Dr. Beienberg, thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Civics in a Year. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who cares about a constitutional republic as much as you do. For more episodes, resources, and updates, follow us on social media or visit us at civics.asu.edu. Make sure to check out the show notes for any relevant links. Special thanks to the United States Marine Band for their performance of the Stars and Stripes Forever. Let's keep building a stronger constitutional republic, one episode at a time.